Sometimes the world just keeps on punching, doesn't it? Sometimes the best strategy might just simply be to rope-a-dope. Hey there, welcome to the show. My name is Roger Whitney. I am your host. This is the show dedicated to helping you not just survive retirement, but have the confidence and the strategy to rock retirement, even when you just feel like you're getting punched and punched. It makes me think of one of the greatest boxing matches in history, the Rumble in the Jungle, where George Foreman went against Muhammad Ali in an epic battle. Going into that fight, George Foreman was favored by most experts because he was in the prime of his career and he had just an amazing force in his punch. And Muhammad Ali, though still the greatest there ever was, in the training sessions, in training camp for him, observers saw that he was just getting pummeled by his sparring partners, just taking abuse from his sparring partners, which further fed that maybe Ali isn't ready for George Foreman and the kind of power that man has. Well, when it came to the match, round after round, Ali was on the ropes, covering in with his gloves, just taking a beating from George Foreman. I sort of remember this as a kid with Howard Cosell and this probably at my grandfather's house. And it was hard to watch. People thought he was going to die in the ring. He was taking such a beating until he let loose and won the match. What people realized afterwards, that all those sparring matches he had in his training where it looked like he was getting beat up, he was actually employing a strategy to toughen himself for the strategy of using the rope-a-dope to just simply sit back and take the punches that are coming at you, conserve your energy until you had the opportunity to act. Everybody was fooled. That image came to mind for me thinking about what you and I have gone through in these last 3 rounds of years. And we know this stuff, but we forget this. And I think a lot of us are experiencing some burnout, is this ever going to end? I can't take this. This is not only physically difficult, it's mentally, emotionally difficult. And I don't care how tough you are, this stuff wears you down and it's easy to get burned out. I've heard it in conversations I've had with clients. I've heard it in conversations I've had in the club. We are taking a beating, not just with our accounts going down and getting those those June end statements and performance reports. That was a good punch to the gut. So I want to take some perspective here and talk about burnout before we get on to listener questions. And we're going to have Kevin Lyles, our head coach in the Retirement Club, come on as well for Coach's Corner. And let's just acknowledge this, what we've gone through that has piled up in our psyche and in our resilience. We've taken some dings. We have a lot of dents in our armor. In 2020, right? You remember 2020, March? COVID came. That was scary. We had a pandemic. We had family members or friends that were sick. We were worried about our own health, worried about the health of our children and our loved ones. We had the economy shutting down, essentially. Everybody staying home and quarantining to some extent. So all of us were thrown out of our rhythm of life. We got to acknowledge that. We're worried about loved ones. We're worried about our health, our whole rhythm. The economy is shut down. We had the fastest bear market in history, a bear market, not a correction. We had our work life disrupted. Weren't sure if we were going to have a job or what we were going to do. Everybody was trying to figure out remote work. Oh, yeah. And the messaging we got, we had to deal with an election that was a little non-friendly, shall we say. And we had all that disruption as well with polarization. 2000 by itself was, I don't know how we stayed off the mat internally and psychologically. And then in 2001, what did we have? We had COVID continuing. We had markets peaking, still had the political stuff going on. We had Russia invading Ukraine towards the latter half of the year. Work was still semi-shut down, not quite shut down. We still had no rhythm as to what could we do? Do I have to wear a mask? Do I not have to wear a mask? Should I get a vaccine? Should I not? Am I going to be able to go into work? When will I be able to go to work? Will it be every day? We were totally off our rhythm. Now let's come to 2022, third round. Got a raging inflation that is not transitory so far. We have a bear market in equities, a really crappy market in fixed income. It's very foggy. We don't know how long this will continue, whether it's inflation. We have interest rates rising. We have elections coming up in the midterms and all the political turmoil that's just starting to heat up for that. We haven't seen anything yet there. Oh, yeah. We have that war in Ukraine and all the political instability, gas prices. Don't forget COVID. We have gone through 2.5 rounds of taking a beating, of not being in our normal rhythm of life. So taking a beating is one thing over and over, just having lots of things happen to us. And that has its own toll psychologically, financially, decision-making wise. But I want to take a sidebar and talk about this rhythm thing for a second, and which is something that we don't talk about near as much. I was having a conversation with a really good friend of mine who took his family and lived somewhere else for a couple months. He has young kids, and he just called me to check in, which I love that he does. He's a good friend. And he was telling me that although they had a great couple months in this fun place for he and his wife and his kids, one of the big lessons that he learned was everybody was out of their rhythm. Husband and wife were out of their rhythm. The children were all out of their rhythm. And they started having issues at night. Their routines were off. They wouldn't go to bed at time. They didn't wake up at time. Everything was out of rhythm. As he was telling me this, I remember with kids growing up, rhythm was important. And when their rhythm was disrupted, all of a sudden they were unsure. They didn't have any stability to ground themselves. Heck, Sherlock, when he has a rhythm, he's ready to go to bed at a certain time. He wants his walk at a certain time. This is a rhythm, some grooves that we've ingrained in our routine that he has come to expect. And those routines give him comfort, just like they do with a child. Now, you being in your 50s or 60s, me, we're adults. We don't need that, but we do. We need rhythm. We need routines and rituals. We want to be spontaneous and have room for that. But having rhythms and rituals and protocols that we follow ground us. And I want to make this point because over the last 2.5 years, in addition to all the craziness and worry about health and economy and jobs and our accounts and everything else, that's stressful enough, but we have not been grounded in having a rhythm of routine, which makes it even worse. I want to acknowledge that with you because I think acknowledging that will give us some grace about how difficult all this is and how freaked out we can get and maybe emotional. Now, what do we do about this? It's not like I have all the answers, but I do think that we can take some proactive action to mitigate and do some rope-a-dope to do some self-care so we're ready to take action when it is appropriate. So the first thing I want to say is, one, when we're in a state like this, drastic action seems like the best thing to do, whether it's in life or the markets or whatever. Generally, incremental action's better when we're under a lot of stress. Now, it may be incremental action very quickly, but drastic actions generally are not going to serve us best. And the key to having this confidence to rock retirement is to minimize unforced errors in all sorts of areas by having a process and a logical way of making decisions, right? So I want to give you a couple thoughts. Number one is the information that you're taking in and what you're focusing on doing. Consider going from macro, looking at everything, which is consuming a lot of media on economy and COVID and world, to closing the aperture and coming back and focusing on micro. And this is part of what we'll be doing next month in a series of how to live a heroic retirement is, especially under stress, we want to focus on micro. An easier picture might be that proverbial, if you have to eat the elephant or you're facing the elephant, take one little bite at a time. If you're climbing a huge mountain, focus on your next step. Don't focus on the long distance because it can get very intimidating and you can feel very inadequate to the task looking at the monumental nature of, say, that peak. But if you focus on your next step, I just got to get to the next corner. I just got to take this next step. So go from macro to micro in the information that you consume and the actions that you're looking at taking. Okay. So if you're on the ropes and you're not rope-a-doping, but you're actually just sitting there getting pummeled and you're ready to go down, what are some proactive steps that you can take to deal with this burnout? I think one is acknowledge what we just went through. Don't minimize this because this is real. It has taken a toll. So actions. The first thing you can do is bring past successes back into mind. You can do this journaling or just sitting there thinking, what other trials have you gone through? What did you do in 2008? What did you do when you were faced with adversity or you were unmoored in your life and where you've had a success to overcome that and get through that? Bring those past successes back into mind to remind yourself, hey, I can do things. I am not simply adrift in the ocean. I've had successes. In heroic verbiage from the stuff we'll talk about next month, they call those hero bars. It's good to remember, hey, I have the capacity to get through a lot of really hard things. Physically, as an example, when I'm really suffering on a bike ride or a mountain bike ride or something physically, I recall I did an Ironman. I never thought that was possible. That was a lot bigger than this, and I suffered. But you know what? I got through that successfully. You grab these things that you've accomplished in the past to remind yourself of your resilience. Number 2, vicarious learning. Re-examine who is around you. Look for people that are doing what you want to do or have gotten through a challenge that you're faced. Go find someone, and it's easier now than ever before through books and podcasts and blogs, is go search out someone that's dealing with what you're dealing with or has dealt with it and learn a little bit about them, because if they can do it and you see yourself in them, well, if they can do it, then I can do it. And once you find those exemplars of sorts, examine, well, how are they doing that? What are they doing differently than me? And start to emulate certain things. You're not going to be able to follow their exact path because you're different than they are, but you can identify what they're doing that you might integrate into your life to help you get back on track. So find people, if you're 55 and you want to retire at 58, go talk to people that have done that. Ask them what they did, what they wish that they would have done differently. And that's one thing we have on the show. We have in the club especially is walk with the wise and become wise. Find people that you want to do and start emulating them. Markets, that's one reason why we have the SMART Sprint. Minimize the inputs of macro news because it doesn't give you any more information to make decisions, as an example. Third is social persuasion, and this is actually surrounding yourself with people who encourage and are supportive of your journey. People that are a little bit ahead of you, a little bit behind you, that you can actually have as foxhole buddies to do things with and have conversations that are encouraging and solution-oriented. And this doesn't have to just simply be individual people. I would say this is your friends. This is your wider social network of acquaintances. And this is also the media that you consume, whether it's TV shows or news networks or podcasts or whatever. You want to surround yourself with people that are going to be supportive of where you're going and not destructive. That's probably one of the biggest, all of these are big levers that we could pull to manage some burnout. And then the last action would be, number 4, to start building up that confidence so you can start punching back metaphorically and get off the ropes, is physiologically just taking care of your body, thinking about your energy, because that's the foundation of everything. And this is one reason why we're doing this heroic retirement series next month, which I'm super excited about. Exercise. releases endorphins. It's one of the most important things you can do to really be healthy. Exercise, gratitude, helping someone else. Those three things, in addition to sleeping better, eating better, those are the things that you want to start implementing to help ground you a little bit more if you're burnt out. I am doing that in my own life when we go through bad markets and I'm having so many conversations where there is this stress and we're trying to manage and work it together, because I am very optimistic all the time, but I am not Pollyannish and I want to deal with issues. But from my end of the microphone in this case, or with clients, I have to have self-care protocols during these times because I have to be strong to absorb all the fear and tenseness coming from so many people and helping them manage it, then I got to make sure I'm okay. Because if I'm not okay, I'm not going to be able to be present with them. This kind of protocol is really important. And there are a number of things that you can do that we've talked about, but you're probably a little bit burnt out. It could be with COVID by itself. Maybe it's your work situation. Maybe it's the market. Probably burnt out. So I want to make sure we acknowledge that and not just say, no, I'm fine, I'm tough. Sometimes that's what I do when I fall down a little bit. But let's acknowledge it. We're burnt out. This has been 2.5 rounds of some pretty major blows. So let's just acknowledge it, reset, remember what a capable person you are, and then start to take some of these action steps so you can start leaning in and getting off the ropes when the time comes so you can rock retirement. With that, I got a couple announcements and then we're going to go on to listener questions. Number one is, I sort of teased it already, is that in August, we're spending a month with Michael Balchin from Heroic or Optimize. And we're going to talk about how do you build a framework to have a heroic retirement. I'm excited about this because we're diving deep into this in the club, and it's a framework that I'm implementing in my life over the last 7, 8, 9 months, and I'm excited for you to hear about it. Second, I just want to ask one favor of you. If you enjoy this show and are finding it value, or even our 6-Shot Saturday email, where we share links and tips, and there's a little bit of two-way conversation because all your replies go directly to me. You can sign up for that, by the way, at 6shotsaturday.com. But if you're enjoying all of this and it is helpful for you, and that is our goal, share this episode or the podcast with someone that you think it might be helpful for, because that will build our community so we can have even richer conversations. And it might be helping someone on their journey to rocking retirement. Hey, this show is sponsored by Boomer Benefits. They speak Medicare, and they are experts at helping someone like you that is applying for Medicare, navigating the Medicare system to help you craft the coverage that's right for you. And the cool thing about Boomer Benefits is that they are compensated via the Medicare system. So whether you use someone like this or not, it's exactly the same price. And by using Boomer Benefits, you're going to have somebody in your corner to help navigate these decisions. And this is who we use in our practice. So if you're navigating that kind of decision or want to do some pre-planning, go to boomerbenefits.com/RAM. Now it's time to answer some of your listener questions, and then we're going to get to Kevin Lyles, our head coach in the Rock Retirement Club. If you have a question for the show, you can go to rogerwhitney.com/askroger and type in your question or leave an audio question. We're going to prioritize audio questions, so you get some extra credit for that to try to get them on the show because we get tons of questions. So just be aware of that. So let's get started with our first question.
Hey, Roger. My name is Scott. I've been retired for about 1 year and 4 months now. And I was looking at this past week's podcast with the title that was referring to reallocating during a bear market. So I was on the edge of my seat waiting for the answer to the question because I've had the question myself. Unless I missed it, I don't think the answer was given or the question was asked. So I'll ask it now. Roger, should I reallocate my investment holdings during a bear market? And if so, how would I approach this? Thanks again.
Well, Scott, that's a great question. And I think we had a snafu with our images and titling in the process that we use to create all this stuff and publish it and create all the collateral material. So I apologize about that. So rebalancing your portfolio in a bear market, Scott. Let's address that. So let's establish what rebalancing a portfolio means. Okay. So when you're looking at a asset allocation, let's assume you have 60% in stocks and 40% in bonds as your target portfolio. And that's the target that you chose through some process to determine your risk return trade-off. So now we have a target portfolio of 60% stocks, 40% bonds. Now, to follow asset allocation, if you're true to, say, modern portfolio theory, you should have some rebalancing process in place. Because what happens? Let's say you do this on a January 1. At the end of the year, if stocks did really well and bonds were okay or bad, you might have 65% or 70% in stocks and 35% in bonds. So now your portfolio is not what your target was. You're 70% stocks rather than 60% stocks, which means you have a different risk return profile than at the beginning of the year because stocks have done better. So assuming that you had a process to get to that target allocation, you did that because you, in a reasoned process, that this is the kind of risk I want to take for the potential return. Well, at the end of the year, if we're now at 70% stocks, you need to rebalance back to your 60-40. So you need to sell enough stocks and buy enough bonds to get back to your target portfolio. I think a best practice for rebalancing is to do that annually. Some people do it monthly or quarterly. It can be all over the place. Every piece of research that I've read said there's not much utility doing it more than annually. Because when you rebalance, you're going to have trading costs, you're going to have the activity, you're going to have potential tax events, et cetera, if it's a taxable account. Annually, I would say is good enough. So now that we know what that is, Scott, we're getting specific to your question. We've had big moves in markets here since January or Q3 of last year, Q4 of last year. Should we accelerate our rebalancing because we're probably more off target than normal because markets have moved so much? This is not a settled argument here, Scott. I have done some rebalancing with clients in an accelerated way because the moves have been more drastic than normal. My suggestion would be is how you go about deciding whether you should or not is look at your allocation currently based on what your target is and set some parameters of, well, if it's within a range of say 5 or 10% of my targets, I'm okay, right? Because we're never going to be exact. Sort of like an airplane. If it's flying south but slightly west, that's okay. It's still going generally the same direction. It's not flying due west. So you could set some ranges, and if you're outside of those ranges, do the rebalancing to get you either within those ranges or back on target. But if they're within some tolerances, then don't worry about it. Don't go through the hassle. Don't deal with the transaction costs, the potential tax costs, etc. And just know you'll pick it up in your annual cycle or whatever cycle you normally pick it up in. Now let's talk about what rebalancing actually has you do. Because psychologically, this is where a lot of people fall down. Let's assume, and this might be hard for you, that our stocks did well and our bonds did bad. Well, that means rebalancing is requiring you to sell the things that did well and buy the things that did bad, right? Because that you're selling the things that have gone up and the things that have gone down, and that gets you back to your target allocation. Well, intuitively or emotionally, we probably want to buy more of what's doing well and get rid of what's doing bad. So it's actually requiring us to do the opposite of what every fiber of our being may want to do. So it's a forced way of selling high and buying low over a very long period of time. So that can be hard. But if you are actually sticking to asset allocation because you believe in the theory and modern portfolio theory and et cetera, then stick with the system. We get ourselves in trouble where we cherry pick what we want based on what intuitively makes sense to us, which essentially means we don't have any grounding behind what we're doing other than our intuition. So you either got to be all in, all out for the most part. Now, so Scott, I would say check the tolerances. If they're outside of, say, 10% of where they should be, you could rebalance. Or you could just let it continue. And I don't think it's a crucial thing to do. Now, what I do think is a crucial thing to do is, from a retirement perspective, is to make sure you have your pie cake bucket system, whatever you want to call it, structured so each investment portfolio has the proper time frame assigned to it. That's, I think, the more critical thing, Scott, as when we're talking about either getting close to retirement or being in retirement. So what am I talking about here? I'm talking about making sure you have a contingency fund for the unexpected expenses or what have you, emergency fund. Make sure you have 5 years of your life pre-funded with non-risky assets of some type, and we've talked about that in prior episodes. And then the rest of the portfolio can be more risk assets, which will likely have its own target portfolio. By doing that, you're going to rebalance each one of those layers individually based on your life and your spending and your circumstance. What I have found, Scott, and this is a lesson I'm reminding myself of, is that is much more of an important decision than do I rebalance just a generic target allocation? Because a year ago, having a contingency fund and 5 years of expected spending pre-funded through very, very safe investments seemed silly. You were getting almost zero yield. Markets were still pretty attractive. There has to be something better we can do with that money. And so it seemed like it was too much slack in the system. Now is the asymmetric return of that choice. This is now the people that did put that in place, although worried about markets, etc., have a lot more optionality and flexibility and a lot more comfort because they know the money that is going down for them is money that they're not going to have to touch for a minimum of 5 years. So I think from an allocation standpoint, not the specific portfolio, but from that portion, that's the more important one. And this is where we're getting the return on it. Now we can actually earn interest with that money because T-bills, 9-month T-bills at 3% or so, and we're not losing that money, and we have a runway for our spending. Now it comes to the next question, Scott. What if you don't have those dialed in quite as well as you wish you had? Do you do that now? That's a hard one because doing that now probably means you have to sell some risky assets to build that liquidity. And there might be some other ways you could do that by redirecting savings, etc. That would probably be the first thing that I did. That's a little bit of a pickle of a situation I don't have really the best answer for, but I would definitely think about redirecting. If you're 2 to 5 years out of retirement, the longer you are out of, before retirement, the more you can maybe just wait it out before you do this. But the closer you are, maybe you don't build a 5-year runway, but you build a 3-year runway just to start to build some liquidity. Emotionally, we're always going to feel like we're at risk, but building this kind of allocation, in theory, when you choose to retire, you're going to be ambivalent to what the markets are doing because you've already neutralized that as much as you can through this kind of structure, even though emotionally it may still be pretty stressful, et cetera. So hopefully that answers your question, Scott. I probably went a little deeper on certain items than you expected and lighter on others, but that's how I would think about rebalancing in terms of doing it in a bear market. So our next question comes from Tim related to decumulation and bear markets. He says, "Hey, Roger, I hope you're doing well." I am, thank you. "I want to retire this year. My 401k and IRA are set up on the quote unquote aggressive plan. Should I change them to a very conservative plan? I've lost a lot of money and I'm afraid a recession may be happening anytime. Please let me know your thoughts." Okay, Tim, so you have the aggressive plan in your 401k and in your IRA. Now, the assumption is during accumulation, that has actually served you very well. Obviously a crazy ride, but probably has served you well. So from some perspective, assuming that that is the case, you've definitely taken some losses over this last 6-7 months, but most likely, if you looked at the returns over the last, say, 10 years, you've probably still done very well and have made money. Now, you're looking at retiring this year. And so you're maybe a little bit late to the game on allocation, but that's okay. You are where you are. Should you reallocate these to a very conservative due to this pending retirement? So the answer depends. And I would listen back to the previous answer with Scott is, It's less about when you're going to retire that will determine the allocation for, in this case, your 401k or IRA. It's really when are you going to touch that money to help pay for the life that you want. Perhaps that 401k and IRA are monies that you're not going to touch for 10, 15 years. If that's the case, because you have other things, maybe after-tax assets, savings, other accounts, pensions that are going to pay for life when you lose your paycheck at retirement. If you have those things, then maybe the time frame for this money is still appropriate. You need to know that first. And you want to think through this in a structured way, because the question is, should I go from very aggressive to very conservative? But the only way you're going to get to that answer is to know certain things first. And that is, okay, from the date that you retire, looking out at a minimum of 5 years, how much are you going to need from your savings? Doesn't matter whether they're tax-free, tax-deferred, or after-tax. How much are you going to need from your savings to supplement other sources of income? So what other sources of income might you have in retirement? Well, maybe you're going to work part-time. You'll have some human capital, or you have rental income that's going to help pay for your bills, or social capital. Maybe you have a pension or Social Security, or if you're that age. All of those things will help carry the load, so to speak, in paying for whatever it is you, and if you have a spouse, you and your spouse want to spend. So you want to map out those first 5 years and see how much is going to be covered from these other sources, which maybe you don't have. I don't know. Because that's going to show you how much you actually need from your money, your 401k, your IRA, your savings account, and whatever else you have on your net worth statement. Once you know the deficit, year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, then you can say, well, which accounts am I going to pay myself? Because essentially what's going to happen here, Tim, is you're going to take your deferred income, which is all this money in 401ks and IRAs, et cetera. That's income that you earned. You just deferred it so it could grow. How are you going to create your own payroll account to pay yourself your paycheck? So you'll need to know which accounts or account that payroll, that check you're going to pay yourself is going to come from. Now, if it is going to come from the IRA and the 401k for the next 4 to 5 years, you probably don't want that in the aggressive plan. And hopefully you've listened to some of our past series on how to build this out sequentially, because you're just going to have to make the decisions. But by doing these first steps, what do I need to spend? And is that feasible long-term? Then if I need to spend that, how much has to come from my savings, whichever account it is? And then which specific accounts am I going to get that money from? That will tell you what you need to invest your IRA or your 401k in. Because if it's not those accounts, and those are accounts that you're not planning on using for 10 years, then you probably don't need to make that decision on those accounts. You need to focus elsewhere. But that would be the method I would go through. Now, notice everything we talked about had nothing to do with what was going on in the world with markets and whether there was a recession or not. Because those things are outside of our control and outside of our ability to predict. We're always coming back to, what can I do? What can Tim do to set himself up? And if it is the 401k and IRA where you have to draw money, then like we talked about in burnout, preferably it would have been done beforehand, but now's a time to do maybe some incremental adjusting rather than the drastic adjustment. Maybe you go halfway and have the first 2 or 2.5 years moved to something very conservative that's not at risk, even to bond markets. It might be time for more of an incremental approach during this tumultuous time. So hopefully that gives you some framework there, Tim. So our next question comes from Dan, related to a pension option he has, and he gets extra credit because it is a audio question. So let's check out Dan.
Hi, Roger. Love the podcast. I'm 59 and a half years old, and I'm receiving SSDI. I've left my former employer and need to take my pension. I can either take a lump sum of approximately $300K or start monthly payments of roughly $1,400 a month. That would continue as long as my wife or I are alive. I do not need this income until 2025. I was planning to take the monthly payments, but with the market being so far down, I'm wondering if I should take a lump sum and invest that amount in the market. and then start taking payments in 2025. I do have other accounts I could draw from if I don't want to start this in 2025. Thank you.
So that's a great question, Dan. So let me hear something. He's getting Social Security disability insurance. So basically his full Social Security check, and he's on Medicare because he has SSDI. That's what that is. And now he's faced with this pension decision, and he doesn't really need the money. So a couple of things. One question you want to check on, Dan, is there any benefit? Do you have the ability, and is there any benefit to deferring your pension, say, to 2025? Some pension plans, one, don't make you take the option immediately upon retirement, and some will actually accrue to make a higher monthly payment the longer you defer, usually out to age 65. I have some specific cases that I'm working with right now where we're actively choosing not to take the pension because the monthly benefit is accruing the longer we wait. So that's something to check on. You say that your initial plan of record was to take the pension payment. But now that it sounds like some things are accelerated and the markets are down, you're wondering whether you should pivot, essentially take on the liability of funding your payments yourself by taking the cash, putting it into an IRA, and then investing it and then creating your own payments, or should you stick with the $1,400 a month payments? You also say that you have other accounts, and this is important. My first inclination is to say, stick with your plan. If you've said, hey, we want to have these monthly payments as a joint life because this makes us have confidence between that and Social Security and the other accounts. If you already made that decision, the fact that the markets are down right now, it's good to maybe re-examine this, but there would be a high hurdle of changing your plan of record. Let's game out what happens if you take the lump sum and invest it. Well, number one, now you and or your wife have to manage this money and invest it, and the markets could go up and recover, or they could go down. Maybe you invest and we have another leg down in all sorts of assets, and now you don't have 300, you have a lot less. And then in 2025, regardless of the market experience you have, now you are responsible for making sure that $1,400 a month or whatever the amount is, paycheck, pension benefit is created. You have the responsibility to do that rather than the pension company. So you're not just simply potentially having upside with markets, you're also owning the responsibility of managing that forever, even when you're 80 or 90, or your wife is 80 or 90 if you pass early. Whereas if you take the pension option, that coupled with Social Security gives you secure income that one of them, Social Security being inflation adjusted, that either you or your wife can never outlive. That's a big thing. And I think of that because you have other investment accounts that you say you could draw from. So it's not like you're not invested, even if you were to take the pension option. So I would say be wary of switching your strategy unless you have a really good case to do it. And then two, check with the benefits department to see if you have the opportunity to delay taking the pension, because there may be some benefit to you in it becoming a $1,400 or $1,500 payment a month rather than a $14 just by waiting a few years, because that might play into that decision. So hopefully that gives you some context. Okay, we're going to have one last question, and this is from, who is this from? It is from, I think it's Ann. Let me find Anna, about how do you deal with a disengaged spouse? So let's listen to Anna.
Hi, Roger. My name's Anna, and I'm from Georgia. I'm 59, and I've recently found myself in semi-retirement due to helping care for my aging mom. And I've taken a deep dive into educating myself about retirement planning. I hate to admit how outside the whole process I've been throughout my entire career, but my husband's always handled our finances. He's taken a pretty passive approach, just plugging money into his 401k and getting a pretty generous match. When I stepped away from my last job and met with a TIAA-CREF rep to discuss my puny little 403b account and what to do with it, I provided our larger financial picture, and she indicated, surprise to me, that we should be just fine, regardless of whether I return to work or not. At that moment, a light switch turned on for me, and I started looking at our life post-retirement, learning all that I could from folks like you who do so much to educate us pre-retirees. So here's my question. My hubby is 62 and still 3 to 5 years from pulling the plug. He has no idea what he wants to do post-work, no purpose yet, so I know he's got some things to figure out. He's not interested in having the conversations I know we should be having. And I've realized there are many, many, many areas of retirement planning he's oblivious to no fault of his own, really. But can you tell we don't work with an advisor? Roger, how can I get him engaged so we don't run up against 65 or 67 or even a layoff or buyout situation for him if we're in a long-term recessionary environment coming up? I'd like to explain the pie cake approach and some other things to him so we can beef up our cash reserves and do some reallocation, but he just doesn't sense the urgency. Any suggestions you have are so welcome. Thanks a bunch.
Anna, you are so articulate. I think you explained that so well. How do you involve a disengaged spouse? And it sounds like they were primarily the financial manager. And don't beat yourself up too much about not being involved, by the way. Every partnership has delegation of responsibilities, and that's just naturally how it happens. So that's not unusual. But now you are awake and you're wanting to be more involved because you, it sounds like, realize that there are more possibilities than you understood that there could be, which is awesome, right? And so you're excited about this and you're ready to explore it. It sounds like, well, how do you get your spouse to do it? And they've been, it sounds like, amazing accumulators and have managed that part of it well. And now they are sort of in a rut or doing the same thing and not really interested in the conversations. Now, I'm not going to be able to fix this for you, obviously. I am airing this because I do want to ask others if they have any tips, because maybe they have faced this situation, to reply to our 6-Shot Saturday email and say, here's a tip for Anna, and share your experience. And I'll try to pass that along either by having an episode about it or sending it along to Anna. But I think an episode would be better because I'm sure we're all dealing with this. So if you're dealing with this or have dealt with this and you have some wisdom for Anna, please reply to our 6-Shot Saturday email. It comes right to my inbox and I'll log those and make sure we share those on an episode in August or September. So Anna, we're going to put the flag up for others. If you're not on our 6-Shot Saturday email list, it's rogerwhitney.com right at the bottom or 6shotsaturday.com. But here's some thoughts, Anna. This is the old lead a horse to water, but really want them to drink. They're not near as excited about this journey right now as you are. And so when that happens, it can be a little overwhelming to the person that doesn't have their eyes open as much as you do. And that can be overwhelming and intimidating and a turnoff of wanting to have to deal with it. So here would be my suggestion. And that would be slowly start to build a retirement framework for the both of you on your own and have conversations about the future that are non-money related. So darling, what are you going to do in 2 years? What kind of things do you want to do? And just start dreaming of things that you want to do together and things that he might want to do, because it's not that far away, only 2-3 years. You think we're going to live in our same house? I like his house, but I can see this. What do you think? Very casual conversations, not within the umbrella of we need a retirement plan. Not within that umbrella. This is just casual talk about the future. And notice, and you can just make some assumptions based on your observations and history with your husband of what those things might be. And then pay attention to your spending. What do we spend now? Maybe you've never looked at it. Now, create your own pro forma budget. Don't have to share it with him. Just get an understanding of what you're spending, get an understanding of costs, and build your own framework and say, okay, well, when we retire, this is the 5-year cash flow estimate. And this is how much we're going to need from our money. And now you're starting to gather information and have a framework, and you can share with him as little as or as much as you want. But if he doesn't want to be involved in the process, you're not going to convince him to do it, most likely. You're just going to want to slowly get him involved by asking lots of little tiny questions. And I was thinking about this. Where are we going to get that money in 3 years? And then, is it okay if I start let's move some money over and just start saving a little bit every month in a savings account. I just would feel more comfortable. You cool with that, darling? It's just stuff like that to slowly lead them. And it may be that they're never going to want to be full in and energized about this as you are. That's just not their nature. And if that's the case, that's okay. And perhaps you can take over some of the reins of the management of things so he doesn't have to. and acknowledge that he's done a great job on the accumulation end and you're all into this decumulation end. And, let me take some of that for you, honey. Those kind of conversations are the things that come to mind, but I'm anxious to hear what we have from listeners to maybe help you on this journey as well. All right, it's that time of the month, end of the month, to bookend this entire month with our coach in the Rock Retirement Club, Kevin Lyles. Kevin, how you doing, buddy?
Doing great, Roger. It's almost vacation time for the Lyles family, so we're getting excited.
Yes, we were just talking about it. And this is an activity vacation, so you've been resting up, right?
I'm training. I'm in training.
And that's a good segue, I think, Kevin, for what I wanted to chat with you about is, I know you just recently finished up a book study on positive expectations. I forget the name of the book. What was the name of the book?
Yes. The Expectation Effect by David Robson.
And we were talking before we even started this about aches and pains. So as you're going, I know you have aches and pains. You've had back injury. I know you've had some surgeries here and there. And you're going on this big active vacation. What are your expectations for not just the vacation, but how you're going to deal with these aches and pains as you age?
I'm just going to ignore them and push forward. I try to study all of the literature on things I can do and do those to a greater or lesser extent, but I don't intend to give into it. That's my thought as to how I'm going to push through. I realize that might not always be possible, and certainly some people can't push through their injuries and their aches and pains, but I always try to make the best of whatever I can do.
So from reading that book, what are some of the tactics to actually push through? I mean, it sounds easy in concept. I'll just suck it up. But then when you are actually in the moment of, say, chronic pain is one of those things that I've learned requires a lot of your attention. And it's easy to just simply focus on it. How do you overcome that?
Yeah, well, the main message in the book is to first acknowledge what's happening. So think about it, talk through it in your own mind, and then to try to reframe it. So maybe it's not a negative. One example, and this doesn't have to do with pain. Well, it has to do with a kind of pain, a fear of public speaking. And your heart is going to race, your palms are going to sweat if you've got a public speaking event coming up. And so one of the things you do is you tell yourself, instead of fearing that and, I won't be able to give my talk, you think, hey, when I get a racing heartbeat, and I get sweaty palms, that's going to make me at my best. And so you reframe it. And I think with pain in the body, yes, we have to listen to our body, but we don't have to give into it. So maybe you have to take an extra day off every now and then from your activities and let it rest. But you can't just have a negative attitude about it. So that's sort of what I've gotten from the book.
Now we've broken it up between psychological or emotional and physical, right? So you're right on, like, speaking physiologically, everything I've read says that the sensation you feel, that racing heartbeat, sweaty palms, physiologically is exactly the same as excitement.
Exactly. That's exactly it.
And so it's just simply trying to reframe it in your mind to have a more positive outlook, I guess.
Yeah. The expectation effect to me is sort of a subconscious thing, right? In other words, what you expect, subconsciously, your mind will make that become real to some extent. That's what a placebo effect is. You take a pill that you expect to stop your headache will stop even if the pill is just a sugar pill because of your expectation. That's a subconscious thing. But the part that the book talks about is taking and back to our fear of speaking, it's acknowledging I'm going to have these symptoms as I get ready to talk. My heart is going to race a little faster. My throat might get a little drier, all the various physiological symptoms that happen, but reframing them consciously that's not a bad thing. Like you say, that's excitement. And when I'm excited, I can give a great speech and I can engage better with my audience. And so it's consciously telling your subconscious what to do.
Yeah, and this is not something you decide in an office and then you're different. It's a practice that you have to build the muscle. I think back when two instances, one personal and one related to markets, because there's a lot of pain
yes.
with markets. The practical one was, I remember my wife and I, we were going to the Dominican Republic and we flew to Miami, all excited. I had my island hat on. I mean, we were just totally the part. And we're sitting outside the gate for our connection to the DR. And we're like, looking at my watch. I'm like, oh, we should be boarding now. What's going on? And then I get back to him like, ends up they changed the gate, but we never heard the announcement. So we missed the flight. And there weren't a lot of flights to Dominican Republic. The next one was like 5 hours later. And we were meeting friends there. We had all this anticipation. Now, this is a lighthearted thing, but that is a stressful time. You're mad, you're disappointed.
Sure.
And I learned this from Dan Miller. We said, well, what does this make possible? And so what my wife and I did at first, after acknowledging it, said, well, let's not just sit in the airport. We caught a cab, we went to the beach and had lunch on Miami Beach. And actually ended up being one of the enjoyable parts of the vacation, came back. And so we reframed it to, hey, what does this make possible? And I think that's
wonderful.
Now to markets, Kevin, a little harder, right? I remember, and you were a participant in this, when COVID hit and we had that COVID bear market. We did this in the club and we had a whole session of what does this make possible? And it was hard at first, but we came up with a big list.
Yeah. And as you look back on it now, 2 years later, Roger, how many of those people that were engaged in that discussion we've heard from who really did turn it into a positive in their life, whether it was realizing they didn't have to be at the office all the time. They could perhaps work from home more. They picked up new hobbies. They engaged more with their families. We've seen a lot of positive outcomes from what was obviously objectively a negative event.
Not just financially, but health-wise, pretty scary.
Absolutely.
And so here we are in a raging bear market, not just in stocks, but in bonds. And we're under that stress where we can start to focus on the pain. And what is it called when you take it to a degree, when you go down the rabbit hole on the negative end? There's a word for that. Nicole will tell me what it is. But it's easy to go down that rabbit hole. And there are a lot of things that high inflation make possible if you really wanted to think about it. From puzzles with your children, things that don't cost money. Yes, they may not be perfect, but it's a reframing, I imagine.
Yeah, hopefully you can find some new hobbies that don't cost as much money, perhaps, if that's a challenge to you. I try to ignore the negative news. That's how I'm trying to ride out this bear market, is just not paying attention to it, turning off the TV, turning off the social media feeds that are dealing with this. I just don't find them helpful at all. This is a normal part of the business cycle. We can't have great returns over the years without these declines. So just get through it, however you need to do it.
Yeah. And part of that is having that plan in place, which we've always talked about. But the key is you can reframe, keep trying to reframe, and you'll always have something to work on, I imagine. Now, physically, it's the same thing. We were talking about waking up with aches and pains. And I wake up with aches and pains, and I'm doing all this exercise, and I took a week off this week, but my strategy has always been, I get up and I say, I'm going to have a great day. There's going to be trouble today, but it's still going to be a great day. That's like my framing in the morning, because I don't want to deny that bad things are going to happen or my knee's going to be sore or what have you. How do you reframe your pains?
I follow the exact same approach. I think it is about the attitude for the day. I think back 10 or 15 years ago, I had plantar fasciitis. And it is worse in the morning when your feet hit the floor for the first time. The pain was just almost unbearable. And you really had to avoid not wanting to get out of bed. And so now I've gotten rid of it. I found a great way to get rid of that. So I haven't had it in 10 or 15 years, but I remember back to those days. And just like you, I tried to focus on the positive things that were going to happen that day. You still had to hit the floor. You still had to get through that 5 minutes of pain with your feet. But once I got beyond that, at least my mind was thinking forward to the enjoyable things I was going to do.
Yeah, I think next month, and our theme next month is all going to be about living a heroic retirement. And we'll have lots of frameworks to work through this, but it's not easy, whether it's markets or physical, but it's your life and you don't want to miss it. And you don't want to go down those rabbit holes.
Yeah, it's much easier said than done, but it is worth the effort to make the attempt and to have the right mindset.
You want to be really pragmatic about it, Kevin. What else you going to do? Right? What else are you going to do? That's all we got. All right, buddy. Hope you have a great vacation, and I hope it's relatively pain-free.
Good. Talk to you in August.
On your marks, get set.
And we're off to take a little baby step you can take in the next 7 days to not just rock retirement, but rock life. In the next 7 days, just spend a little time acknowledging how much you've been on the ropes this year. Maybe you weren't on the ropes as much as other people that you know. When I look at it for myself, I feel like I wasn't on the ropes, but I was. I dealt with COVID. I dealt with family members. I dealt with the stress, but I just sort of push it down and don't acknowledge it. So I have to do this too. So not that we have to dwell in any of this stuff. I think it's just to, acknowledge this. I have to do that a lot, honestly, when I'm with work. It's Thursday here, and I work very hard when I work. And Thursday, I'm a little burnt out. I work a little bit too much. I know that. I'm working on it, but I'm a work in progress. So acknowledge what the last 2.5 rounds of life has been and give yourself some grace and go micro on your decisions, okay? Tell you, in a few days, we are going to Colorado for about 6 weeks this year. I'm going to mountain bike the Monarch Crest Trail with a client. Will be my guide. It'll be our second time. I'm excited to be in 50-degree weather at night. Excited to be with my wife and Sherlock and lots of visitors. What are you excited about? I hope it's something important to you, and I hope it goes well. The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance reference is historical and does not guarantee future results. All indices are unmanaged and cannot be invested in directly. Make sure you consult your legal, tax, or financial advisor before making any decisions.